Hello and welcome. This is Ben Zeller, one of the co-general editors for Nova Religio, the Journal of Alternative and Emergent Religions. And today we are having a conversation with two of our authors. We're having a conversation with Professor Martha Smith Roberts, Assistant Professor in the Department of Religion at Denison University, and Professor Jenna Gray-Hildenbrand, Associate Professor of Religious Studies and the Department of Religious Studies and Philosophy at Middle Tennessee State University. The two of them have co-authored a piece called Finding Religion, Spirituality and Flow in Movement, an Ethnography of Value of the Hula Hooping Community, which was published in Nova Religio, Volume 22, Number 3, February 2019. So thank you, professors, for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for talking. So to get us started, for those who haven't read the article yet, can you tell them a little bit about what it's about?
Yeah, so the article and our research focuses on hoop dancing, which is a form of hula hooping that combines adult-sized hoops and dance music. And we're interested in examining the ways in which embodied practices like hoop dance can be seen as religious or spiritual activities by practitioners. And so the article goes through descriptions of hoop dance, what hooping movement is. So we try to explain what that looks like and feels like, what flow is, the flow experience in hoop dance. And then the article also talks about the language used by hoopers to describe their practices. That's language of religion and spirituality, but also narratives of transformation. And then finally, we talk about the community of practice that emerges from these individual experiences of hoopers. And we try to think about that community as a form of a new religious movement. And we also try to complicate the terminology of new religious movement a bit. So that's a general overview. There's also, I think it might be worth noting that the title includes this phrase, ethnography of value. And so I think what that means, because I don't think that's self-evident necessarily, is that our research wasn't interested in imposing the category of religion onto hoopers to say hula hooping is a religion, but rather we were interested in how hoopers themselves use religion and spirituality to show the value of their practice and what that can tell us more broadly about religiosity and meaning making in new religious movements. So that's a little bit of an overview of the big article.
So you mentioned that it complicates the sort of the way we think about new religions. Can you say a bit about that? I think especially the people watching the video might be either researchers or students of new religions, so it might be helpful to hear what you mean by that.
Yeah, so one of the things that we thought was very useful, as Martha had noted, is using this framework of an ethnography of value. And so if I'm getting at your question that you're asking, Ben, is that we aren't necessarily interested so much in imposing the category of religion, but investigating how hoopers themselves were using that terminology of religion and spirituality in order to explain their own experiences in the hoop. And so methodologically, what we were finding was that hoopers themselves were over and over and over again explaining that their hula hoop practice, their embodied experiences in the hula hoop, were a spiritual practice or a religious practice or a meditative practice. And we wanted to understand what that term meant for them. And so through a survey, we did an online survey of over 500 hoopers back in 2010. And then we did a lot of participant observation. Martha and I got ourselves some hoops and we did hooping ourselves, and just talked to people and went to different hooping workshops and retreats and classes and had that embodied experience with other hoopers to find out what that terminology meant to them. For many hoopers, they did not find their practice to be religious. They actually saw religion as a negative connotation. So you can see that I'm spiritual but not religious, or they would be religious. There are many Christian hoopers in the community, but they saw their hooping as supplementing their religious practice. And so over the years, and I know Martha has as well, used hula hooping as this amazing teaching tool in the classroom. I haven't actually hooped in the classroom, but I've used videos of Baxter's classes or the hoop path to sort of destabilize our students' understanding about what religion is, what spirituality is, because for these hoopers, spirituality doesn't start, for example, with a belief system, which a lot of times our students think. It starts really with this felt, embodied experience of hooping.
Can you tell us a bit about how you got into this research?
So Martha and I were both grad students at the University of California, Santa Barbara, many, many years ago. And we wanted to get away from, reading and being in front of our computer. And so we decided, let's go to this hula hoop class because it's Southern California and that's what you do. And this was going to be our way, Dr. Zeller, to not think about religion. We weren't going to do it, right, Marty? And so we go to this hoop class, and it was a lot of fun, and we had to get out of our head and try and keep these plastic hoops up around our waist. It was an exercise in humility and humble exercise. And so at the end of the class, we laid on the floor, and our instructor rubbed essential oils on our temples, and we were practicing a manifestation technique. And I remember looking over at Marty and saying, oh, there's something here, something's going on. And it wasn't too long after that Jonathan Baxter came out to California to our class and started talking about hoop path. And I think that we were hooked. This is not our primary area of study for either of us, but we've been interested ever since.
I could imagine that moment where you thought, I'm doing something fun to get away, and all of a sudden you said, I have to start studying it.
No footnotes, there was no reading. It was going to be this beautiful thing. And it really is. I mean, and it has been. It's been a wonderful exercise and a wonderful academic pursuit to co-author something with Martha, because she brings an academic expertise that I don't have. And so that has been a really wonderful experience over the years too. So thank you, Marty.
Yeah, no, collaboration and working together has actually been a real highlight of this project for us. So it did end up actually being an escape from both of our dissertations because it became a side project that we were working on. So it still served a good purpose in terms of relief from some of our writing and reading. But you'd mentioned this tension around new religious movements, and Jenna's primary research is around new religious movements. And we didn't initially think that this was going to be about new religious movements, because what happens in hooping and with the hoop path doesn't fit the sort of typical way that we think about new religious movements. It's not sort of institutional. It's not based on a system of beliefs. There isn't sort of a guru figure or an authoritarian or a set of sacred scriptures or anything like that. And so initially we didn't necessarily think about it in terms of new religious movements. And it was only really in writing this article and other articles that we've written about hooping that we started thinking about the ways that hooping actually could tell us more about how new religious movements develop. And the key for us was the word movement. And so we were like, let's start with the movement of the body, which is where hoopers are starting, and then think about how they create a movement or a community out of that. And then what does that have to do with newness? What does that tell us about what makes something new? What does that tell us about religion and spirituality? And so we kind of reframed that notion of new religious movement and said, let's start with movement. Even though Jenna is much more focused on new religious movement scholarship than I was, we didn't actually start there. That just kind of became something that emerged out of our research together.
Marty's contribution to the study was about embodiment in the body, because I really hadn't been thinking about that in my research. And so, her expertise and her dexterity with the flow literature, I still can't pronounce what's his face's last name in the flow literature, but that ability to really think about all of the amazing literature on embodied spirituality and the body as being the center and focus of authenticity, authority, and self. That the idea too, that in what we were finding with Hoopers was that they were coming to this movement practice not for spirituality, not for just either they wanted a new form of, they were like us. They thought it would be fun. They thought it was going to be a form of exercise. They went to a concert, or they went to Burning Man, or they did something and they saw Hoopers and they thought it was beautiful and they just wanted to try. And then the more they got into it, many Hoopers found is they had an unexpected experience of transformation, whether it was physical, emotional, whatever it was, many of them describe it as unexpected. They didn't start hooping because they thought something was going to happen that changed their life in some way. And so that also with that framework of the ethnography of value, that they had this experience, and it was after having the experience that they were looking for a framework or a language to understand it. And then they were looking for a path to recreate that experience, was very useful in helping us to articulate and understand what was happening with Hoopers. Because it did seem that for many of them, that was what was happening. And I think that's why many of them gravitated towards Hoop Path in our survey, because Jonathan Baxter was giving them a sort of language to help them articulate that experience more so than some of the other hooping communities that now have seemed to kind of disappeared. That was one of your questions that you had asked, is where are they now? And so that gave us an opportunity to kind of look, well, where are they now? And some of them have kind of disappeared, but Jonathan Baxter is still around, who was the subject of our article, because our survey data showed that the Hoop Path, his organization, was the most popular among our survey participants.
Were there any surprises during your research, things you weren't expecting?
Yeah, so for me, I think the first surprise is one that we've mentioned already, which was that we went to a hula hoop class and were greeted by language of manifestation and transformation and religion and spirituality, which we didn't expect at all. So it was surprising that you can find religiosity in all of these unexpected places. And there's actually been a lot of research. That was the second surprise, was that, oh, other people see this as well, right? So there are other forms of physical practice that researchers are now thinking about. Well, what does this tell us about religiosity? Things like Soul Cycle, for instance, or CrossFit or surfing are some of the more well-known examples of that. But hula hooping, it was like, oh, this is just a toy, a game, a fun thing. And it is all of those things, but it also can have some really deep transformative power for the people who are invested in this. And so it reminded me to keep looking for those sort of surprising moments. And religion is sort of everywhere in some ways. The other surprising thing for me is how universal hula hooping is, and where I find hoop dance. Right now I am in Berlin, Germany. I'm on sabbatical, I'm doing research over here, and I see hoopers everywhere. Well, at least when we were still on the streets. There are hoop jams, there are hoop teachers over here, there are workshops. I see people on the train carrying their hula hoops. And so I think I've just been surprised at like how ubiquitous adult hoop dance is for something that we didn't really know existed before we tried it out. So it's everywhere. So I encourage the viewers, if you don't know what we mean by hoop dance, first look at the beautiful pictures in the article by Cassandra Kapsis, who was our photographer. We really owe her a lot for that, but also just Google it and watch, because there are so many great videos of hoop dance online. And I think, I hope that the listeners of this will be really surprised and excited to see what it looks like, and it makes more sense to think about how it could be a transformative experience as well.
We'll add some links. So if the viewers should sort of scroll down on the screen, you should see some links down there as well. What's the big takeaway from your research? For a person who, for some bizarre reason, is not interested in or new religious studies, what can they take away from this, even if this particular movement doesn't, is not something which fascinates them, but as it should?
For me, the big takeaway and the big picture is many of the items that we've already been talking about. The idea that you can find religion and spirituality in, well, we both study the American context, the US context, in the most unexpected places. And I think that what Martha was just talking about, what was very surprising to her, and I think that perhaps some of us who do new religion studies and are often surprised that people are surprised that you find religion in unexpected places. But the other big picture takeaway is that how useful that this work has been for me as a pedagogical tool in the religious studies classroom, and to work with students, not just in my cults and new religious movements class, but in my intro classes, in any class where I'm talking about religion, to help when I present them videos about hoop path or about hoop dance, and I say, okay, is this a religion, or how would you characterize that? And they say, no, that's just hooping, that's just playing around. And then maybe I'll show a video of Jonathan Baxter talking about what it means to him, or he's talking about the Maidan, or he's talking about hoop path. They start to change their mind a little bit. And so it's one thing as religious studies scholars and teachers, we often do that exercise, or maybe it's just me, what is religion, define it, and then they have the aha moment where it's difficult to define. I think it adds another layer when you show them videos and you incorporate those things. And I think that this, in some ways, hoop dance seems strange and unfamiliar as a spiritual practice or religious practice, and we should note that for many hoopers, it's not religious at all, and they think it's strange that someone would find it spiritual. But once students learn more about it, and once you talk to even other people about it, it makes sense. There's something analogous in their own life that they can relate to and say, oh, yeah, I've had that moment too, where I felt, that experience of connection that was ineffable or difficult to describe, and I wanted to replicate it. And so there's something relatable. And so in that case, the big takeaway, or the thing that was surprising to me, was how relatable and how unsurprising it is.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask you a question?
I agree.
Can I ask you a question,
Sure.
Ben?
Yeah.
So what did you think when you got this? I mean, you see you see stuff all the time as an editor in this volume. Like, not that you would remember, but I mean, hula hoops, and you saw that, I'm sure, I don't know, or you saw the pictures. What did you think?
We get a fair number of proposals on things which are sort of, I call them quasi-religions. Things
Okay.
they're if you take a functionalist approach, which I basically do, they're functionally religion. Like basically I'm a Durkheimian. So, so I mean, I looked at it and I said, okay, that makes sense, in the same way in which, eating can make sense as religion and other things. I think it struck me as weird, but a lot of what we look at is weird, because I think my limited experience was that hoopers didn't think about their hooping in a religious or spiritual way, because I think I was thinking about what my elementary school kid does, or what I used to do like on the playground. So I think the weirdness was that I thought about hooping in a purely sort of physical way. And as I read your work, I realized that at least at this moment in the communities you were looking at, hooping was much more than that. So I think that was my first thought, is that I had to sort of realize that hooping could mean different things to different people, which isn't at all surprising, because that's true for pretty much anything we're looking at. But no, I mean, you had me sold as soon as I really read the first few pages that this should be looked at seriously.
Yeah, and I think that is part of it. I think is that it is this relatable object, the hula hoop, that's been around, since the 1950s. It's this plastic hoop. It's a children's toy, it's not some esoteric thing. It's something that anyone can have. You can make it yourself, or you can go to the dollar store, or you can get you can get something that glows up. It glows and and lights up. But yeah, it's something everyone can have. It's not an elitist sort of object. But yes, go and Google. Watch it. It's very beautiful.
Yeah. I think for me, some of the takeaways from the research, I agree with everything Jenna said. I think pedagogically, this has been a really perfect example that I use in classes a lot too, because it is like weird and surprising and all of those things. But I also think there's just so many levels to the way that you can analyze what's happening. And so we talked a little bit about how it can complicate new religious movements or notions of what a religious experience is. It also, tells us a lot about what it might mean to say I'm spiritual, not religious, right? So a lot of people use that term and are interested in what is that about secularization? Is that about the decline of religion? And so looking at what these Hoopers are telling us about what they think these terms mean and how they think that this can still, that they can still create a community out of something like hula hooping or whatever it might be, but that spirituality and religion are still really viable terms today. They're not going away. They just are taking on new forms and new meanings, and they connect to generations very differently, right? So our Hoopers that we started looking at were all Gen X Hoopers. That's who really started this movement. But now there are, of course, a lot of millennial Hoopers, a lot of Gen Z, iGen, and the movement is changing. The way that they talk about the movement is changing. So I think there are a lot of potential avenues for the significance of this content or this research as well. So in addition to pop culture, right, we mentioned that it's a hula hoop as well. It's a commercial item that they sold millions of. And so it tells us a little bit about materiality, about the significance of popular culture and how that can have deep meaning for people. Right? So there's a lot more that we want to explore with this topic for sure.
I love that it centers practice. Practice, and again, not that belief or doctrine aren't important or even institution, but that practice is so central. I think you already answered the question about what new has happened since you published it. But anything else to add in terms of new updates?
Yeah, so we had both. This gave us an opportunity. Thank you so much for inviting us to talk about the article, because we both had started working on different projects, and this gave us an opportunity to go and look and see what everyone's been up to. I think we definitely both have been following Jonathan Baxter since the article, and because we have built a relationship with him as an interlocutor and as someone who we've worked closely with and interviewed, and he started a podcast. He doesn't do the large retreats that he did at UNC in the gymnasium there anymore, but he does have a podcast. You can look that up. He recently, 2 days ago, he did a Stay In, Stay Safe free Hoop Pack web class. So if the viewers want to do a free online web class, I would be looking at his Facebook page. You can do that. So he's still very active. I mean, he has a huge following, but other websites like hooping.org, which we cited, started in 2003. As far as I can tell, it is no longer operational. Their Facebook page, their last post was in 2017. So again, like Martha said, primarily this group was, the Hoopers we were working with started in rave culture with Generation X. And so a lot of those leaders in that community, I think, are sort of in a transitional period, as we all are, for Gen Xers. We're keeping our kids busy right now. So it'll be interesting to see the sort of generational changes. I think what our first article we wrote about the Hoop community, we focused really on the generational aspect of the Hoop community. So we'll see. But what's really interesting too is that Jonathan Baxter is able to continue as this leader in the community and weather a lot of these changes because of who he is and we will have to make sense of that. He's in, as we say in the article, he is the son of a Southern preacher. So he's not one of these Southern California type teachers that we first encountered when we started taking classes. So he comes from a different region of the country, has a different kind of style. So it'll be interesting to see how this group develops. Marty, what do you think? Anything else?
Yeah, I think that sums it up. I mean, really, we just a lot of it is one of those movements that because it doesn't have a certain kind of institutional structure, it's hard to follow, and certain things do fall away. So hooping.org was this huge center of hoop life, and now that's kind of gone, but it's been replaced by these sort of more ephemeral Facebook conversations or YouTube conversations that are happening. So we've also been thinking about, right, how social media, it changes the structure of the community as well. But yeah, so I think what you said basically covers most of it.
What are you both working on now? And I should probably say, for those who might be watching this into the future, we happen to be recording this at the moment of the coronavirus lockdown. So, so right now, all of us are sort of in a liminal spot. But in a general sense, what are you both up to now?
Yeah, so right now I'm actually on sabbatical and trying to get some writing done. It's been a little difficult to get resources, but that's all right. I have been working on a project that's interested in religious pluralism in the US. And so thinking about not just the ways in which religious pluralism is about a diversity of beliefs and practices, but rather how bodies fit into that. So in that way, it might be very similar to the Hoop Path work. But in this project, I'm looking at a more sort of historical view and thinking about public exhibitions over the course from the late 19th century to the present that have put bodies on display in service of sort of educating the public about pluralism and humanism. And so I look at world fairs, and I kind of move through to Holocaust museums. And my last example is of the Body Worlds exhibits. And that's part of the reason I'm here in Berlin, because that's the German, originally a sort of German invention. So I'm thinking about the ways in which putting bodies on display for the public also changes our notions of what a religion sort of looks like and what religious diversity looks like. And so thinking through race, ethnicity, and the diversity of bodies, in addition to belief and practice as the markers of religious diversity. So that's an extension of some of my early dissertation work as well. But, yeah.
So I also am teaching my classes remotely. And in addition to that, I have been doing field work with sign following Christians or serpent handling churches in Appalachia for the last, since 2013. So I guess it's been seven years. Oh my goodness. So I'm working on a manuscript that will look at the history of the serpent handling tradition, but primarily I'm focused on the criminalization of that practice in Appalachia. So looking at the legal issues surrounding that. In that way, it does relate to hula hooping, because I'm looking at that this idea of the anointing and the taking up of the signs, right, in serpent handling tradition is a very embodied experience, that religion is better felt than told. So really that experience is the authoritative source, right? That is the felt experience of God, where perhaps in hula hooping, that experience is telling you something authentic about yourself. It's an authenticity that's within. With serpent handling, it's an authentic sort of external source that is felt within. So that's not in the book, but I do see a connection. See, Marty and I, there is some connection between our work and the hula hooping.
Thank you so much, Professors Martha Smith-Roberts and Professor Jenna Gray-Hildenbrand, for joining us. And for those who are watching this, if you scroll down, you'll find a link to their article, Finding Religion, Spirituality, and Flow and Movement an ethnography of value of the hula hooping community, and some other fun links as well. So thanks for watching.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you.